Hi guys, so this video is to help walk you through the subsheet for empirical rule and normal distribution practice, but it would also just be useful for general support when you're trying to comprehend what the empirical rule is and what it can tell you. So first things first, we have the problem that states 2,000 freshmen at State University took a bio test, scores are normally distributed, and that normally distributed tells us that we're going to draw one of these bell curves, but one is already on the worksheet for you. The mean is 70. You'll notice that I put that right in the center. The mean always goes in the center. The standard deviation is 5, which means you count 5 for each tick mark. So 3 tick marks, 75, 80, 85, and then 3 tick marks to the left, so 65, 60, and 55. Okay, so once you have your picture all set up, things are a little bit more useful because now we can start talking about the empirical rule. So the empirical rule states that if you go out one standard deviation on both sides, so from 70, if you go out one standard deviation to the right and one standard deviation to the left, that you have 68% of all possible outcomes. So this curve adds up to 100%. And so you see that down here at the bottom. I'm going to reference that a couple times, that the total area under the curve is 1 or 100. But this middle orange piece, again, one standard deviation in both directions, represents 68% of all outcomes. Okay. Second part of the empirical rule, if you go out 2 standard deviations, so 2 standard deviations, you're now dealing with 95% of all possible outcomes. And so if we shade that here, all right, so 2 standard deviations out gives us that 95%. So that's that green piece that's shaded there. So again, thinking that the total area under the curve is 100%, that is almost all of the curve right there between 2 standard deviations. Okay, if we go out a little bit further, meaning 3 standard deviations in each direction, so you'll see there, the area 3 standard deviations in both directions gives you 99.7% of all outcomes. Constantly coming back to this idea that the total area under the curve is 1. Okay, if the total area under the curve is 1, we've got almost all of the area under the curve within 3 standard deviations. So if you're thinking, where is the rest? Because this is only 99.7. Well, that missing 0.3 is here, and it's here. Okay, so when we go this way and when we go this way to positive infinity and negative infinity, you get 0.3%, which is really kind of negligible when you're trying to draw this picture. So that's why we only go out 3 standard deviations in both directions. Okay, and so that's going to be split up here, this 0.3. So if we're going to split that, we can just finish our picture. That's going to be 0.15 and 0.15. That area going to positive infinity and negative infinity. Okay, that's going to be useful. We actually just answered question D of your worksheet. So if we scroll down to question D, it says what percentage of scores is less than 55? Well, if we're looking up here at the picture we just drew, this 3 standard deviations out in both directions, this blue 3 and 3. So that blue shaded area gives us 99.7, which means the remaining 0.3% is in these highlighted areas off to negative infinity and positive infinity. Well, less than 55 is going to be that 0.15% of people. So that's going to be the answer to D. So go ahead and jot that down. All right, so let's keep going. Question A states, what percentage of scores are between 65 and 75? Well, those are those orange cutoff marks on my screen, and these orange cutoff marks represent that middle 68%, one standard deviation to the right, one standard deviation to the left. So the answer to A is just 68%. B asks what percentage of scores are between 60 and 70. So between 60 and 70, we're going to need to draw that in our picture. Use a different color, this gold color. So from 60 to 70, that's only one standard deviation to the left. So if we're looking at just this piece of the curve, well, let's remember that the green cutoffs, so from here to here, are 95% of all outcomes. So if I only have half of that, all we have to do is take half of that 95%. So half of 95% gives us 47.5%. Moving on to C. What percentage of scores are between 60 and 85? So between 60 and 85. So if we're looking here, all the way over to 85. That's not one of those three numbers that we see, but it's very close. So if we're just looking at this blue shaded region, that should show almost all of the green, which is 95%. Okay, and so that green area is 95%. All we did was go out a little bit further to this blue shaded piece to the right. Well, let's consider if the green piece is 95%, then we'd have 95%, and the blue is 99.7%. How much further out did I have to go from the green to get to the blue? Okay, so 95 minus 99.7, I get 2.7. 2.7 divided by 2. I'm sorry, not 2.7. That should be 4.7. So 99.7. Let's backtrack just a little bit, just to clear this up. So 99.7 and 95. I have almost all of the curve with scores between 60 and 85. I'm looking at this green piece, which is 95, and then this little bonus blue piece to the right. So if I want to know how much further did I extend getting from 95 to 99.7, there was a jump of 4.7%. So from here, that green line out to the blue line and the green line out to the blue line on the right and the left, there was an increase of 4.7. And so 4.7 divided by 2 tells me 2.35. So that means that this little piece over here is 2.35, and this little piece over here is 2.35%. Okay, well right now I'm not really concerned with between 60 and 55, but let's go ahead and consider back to this giant blue shaded region. The big blue shaded region is what we're after. What percentage of scores are between 60 and 85? So between 60 and 85, I have 95% all the way from here over to here. But then I go a little bit further, I have that extra 2.35%. So the final answer for C should be 97.5%. Since we've already got our picture set up for it, I'm actually going to jump down to question G. So question G, approximately how many biology students scored between 55 and 60? So that's a little different than what we've been talking about up here. Here we're looking for what percentage of scores. Here we're looking for approximately how many students scored between 65 and, or sorry, how many scored between 55 and 60. Okay, so if that's the question we're focusing on, let's clean up our picture. We just discussed that the little pieces to the left and right of those green lines, I'm going to highlight that in just a second. So we just decided that these little pieces between that green and that blue dashed line that you see on my screen, this little piece is 2.35, just like this little piece over to the right is 2.35. Okay, using that, that's going to be really helpful here for this next question, G. G says approximately how many biology students scored between 55 and 60. Well, 2.35% of students scored between 55 and 60. That's 2.35%. And then we had a total of 2,000 freshmen who took the test. So all we have to do is find 2.35% of that total 2,000. To find 2.35% of our total 2,000, I'm just going to multiply, I'm going to multiply 0.0235, because if I move that decimal place over, that represents 2.35%. So 0.0235 times my total of 2,000. All right, and that's going to give us the number of students that scored in this little purple area to the left between 55 and 60. So we'll press enter and we get 47. All right, and that's your final answer for question G down here. Okay, 47 students scored between 55 and 60. Question F looks really similar to that one, so we're going to go ahead and move on to that one next. Approximately how many biology students scored between 60 and 70? Okay, so let's come back up to our picture. Of the 2,000 biology students who took the test, how many scored between 60 and 70? That looks like a familiar portion of shaded curve. So if you remember in question B, we were asked what percentage of scores are between 60 and 70. So the percentage of scores between 60 and 70 is 47.5. So all I have to do is find 47.5% of those 2,000 freshmen. Okay, again, that's just going to be multiplication. So to find 47.5%, we'll do 0.475 times the total of 2,000. And that gives us 950 students. Okay, so that's our answer for part F. We are almost done with the front side of this. We've got one left to answer. What percentage of scores is greater than a score of 80? So let's find out. So starting fresh with our picture, what percentage is greater than 80? Let's go ahead and shade that. Okay, greater than 80, that's going to go to there's a couple ways we can think about this. That could go all the way to positive infinity. Since we're talking about a test score, it might not sit well with some of you guys to think about infinity on your test score. Okay, so if you're not comfortable with thinking about this as positive infinity, you can think of it as just the maximum score on whatever this biology test was out of. Okay, so if we go all the way to the right, what is that percentage? Well, let's consider, there's a couple ways we can think about it here. The way that I'm going to try to explain it is thinking about, here I have 95% of all possible outcomes. So if I have 95% of all possible outcomes just in here, and the total under the curve is 100%, then what that means is the area over to the right over here, this pink area, and I'll change colors, this blue area, all the way to positive infinity and negative infinity. This pink area and this blue area must be the remaining 5%. Again, the curve adds up to 100%. This middle green portion is 95, so the remaining right and left tails, I guess if you want to think of them, they kind of look like little tails. Those sides will give you the remaining 5%. So if I have 5% split between the pink tail and the blue tail, that means I have 2.5. Oops. I have 2.5% over here and 2.5% for this shaded blue. Okay, giving me the green piece of 95, the highlighter purple pink piece 2.5, and this blue piece to the left also 2.5. Okay, so finally we come back down, what percentage of scores is greater than 80? Well, that's just this pink one over here, and that is 2.5%. And that finishes it up for the front side of the worksheet. So a couple things to remember, just kind of in summary, we have these three values here that represent the empirical rule. One standard deviation in both directions is 68%, two standard deviations in both directions is 95%, and three standard deviations above and below that mean of 70 gives us 99.7%. The total area under the curve is 100%, and that information is enough to tell us a lot about the rest of the distribution of these scores, or whatever variable it is that we're working with. So I'm going to leave the back side of this worksheet for you guys to try on your own. You're welcome to reference back to this video for different parts of how I was able to break down individual pieces of this curve, but otherwise I'm hoping that you guys are feeling a little more comfortable with the normal curve and the empirical rule. I'll be able to answer any questions when I get back to class tomorrow, but again, this worksheet is due when I return. So enjoy the rest of your day.